Hello, welcome to Model Kit Stuff and welcome to my next build, which is this, the Miniart 1:35 scale Tempo A400. This is a kit that's been released in a number of different formats. This particular one is a railway medical vehicle. And what we're intending to do is build this as a little diorama with this Scottish Highland Pipers infantry from Normandy. What we're going to do is build a little diorama with the two sets here on a little base, and show this abandoned and distressed with these chaps walking past to give you an impression that they're entering into Germany. It's the basic idea. The vehicle that we're going to do is the one that's on the front here. So there's lots and lots of different options in this kit. I quite like the red one, but actually I think this colour is going to lend itself really well to the distressed look. And with the little red notes, I think it will really pop out. So we're gonna mess around with it. We're gonna have a play with it, do some extreme weathering, and just have a lot of fun with it. And then we're gonna do some figures, which we've not done on the channel before. I don't consider myself to be a particularly good figure painter, but I think I can hold my own. So we'll use all of them and have them in their marching format. And just to make things interesting, we've got someone playing the bagpipes, so that'll look a little bit different. So I think that's the introduction done. Let's get on with the build. Right then, we have a base already. This is a base that I've used on a previous diorama, which had a German armoured car on it and some figures. And most of it is okay. There's a little bit of paint that's been lost from what is a resin base that's been mounted on a picture frame. So some of the paint's been lost where the figures came off. Now these sort of all started falling apart, so there might be some touch up needed, but we're gonna wait and see until we've got the actual vehicle and figures on. But you can see what we've got is a cobbled street there, with some scenery either side of it, yeah, I think that will be perfect. So how I envisage it at the moment is that we'll have the tempo in the background, all distressed, with the figures walking across in the foreground. But I might put the tempo here with the cat and the figures. So composition we will sort out a little bit later when the figures are made up and we've got the vehicle in a position where we can appreciate the size and scale of it. So when we've got both of those built up so that we can sort of understand how it would all look, then we'll complete the composition view. But for now, that's it for the base. The base has been just needs a little damp cloth to go around the edge, and then I think we're ready to go. So even though this has been in the display cabinet, it does collect a little bit of light dust over time, and the things in my cabinet get cleaned twice a year as a rule, which is when I rotate what I've got on display. I'm often asked where I put all my models. Well, the answer is a lot of them are in the attic, and I rotate them and put different ones on view at different times. So ones I've just finished tend to go out and then on view, and then something else will go in the attic, and they get stored in little boxes which are sealed plastic boxes, and then I can rotate them. That is now clean and ready to go. So that's the start of our diorama. That was quick, wasn't it? So to keep this dust free while we're building our model, I'm just putting it inside. It just happens to fit nicely inside the Miniart box. Now the sprues have been taken out and put into a build tray. This is a build tray that's become free because we've just completed the Bulldog, and so that will keep that dust free, so it's there ready for use as soon as we need it. So the actual Tempo kit itself has a build tray of its own, which allows me to keep it all nicely separated. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these sprues into individual bags. We'll label the bags rather than the sprues. That's easier and quicker to do. And then we'll have all our parts in one tray, and there's enough space in here to keep the model as it's starting to be built up. And then when we've got small parts that are built up, I put them in these little containers which have tissue paper in, you can see, and I can layer the tissue paper, put some parts on, put some more tissue paper, stack them up in there. So parts ready for paint, parts painted, ready to be installed. They can all go in these boxes which sit inside the tray nicely, and that's how I work. It gives me access to everything. It means I can bring everything out onto the desk, and then when I'm working on a different build, I can put this this drawer back in its place in storage, ready for the next time I'm working on it. So that is for the Tempo, and we'll do a separate one for the figures. So this is the build tray for my figures. Again, there's enough space in here to keep the figures as they get built up, and we will mount the figures for painting as we build them. And again, there should be enough space in here for these to be stored. All the packaging we can get rid of now, we don't need it. Okay, first thing that I want to do with any build is contain my excitement and have a good flick through the instructions, get an understanding of how the manufacturer wants you to put together their model, and then apply some reasoning as to whether I want to do it that way or not. So the paint scheme that I want to use is this one on the back. So one of the things that I will be able to do is remove this page at some point and use that as a paint guide separately. Our paints are shouted out on the front page, but we can't remove that just yet because of this. Now what I will do is I will go through the instructions, identify which of these colours we need, because some of them will be applicable for other vehicles, not the one I'm doing. Make up that list and then decide out of the paints that I've got which paints I'm using, whether that be ICM, Humbrol, enamel, acrylic, you know, all of that sort of stuff we'll consider. So that's something that we'll do in a minute. I'll do that off camera, you don't need to see that. But as I look at step 1 to 4 here, this is why it's important to read the instructions, because in step 4 they've got you assembling the photo etch windscreen wipers and applying them to the windows. Well, I don't want to do that because of painting. Already immediately step 1 I'm thinking I'm not building it in the way you want me to build it. So we can see that there's the potential for sub-assemblies with that being attached to that, but without some of these things being attached. So already quite a complicated looking build with all these little parts going on and photo etch parts going on, but I can see that we could paint that without the seats going in. We could have that attached on. We could paint the battery separately and add it after all of that's been painted. And then how do I want to weather it? I probably want to weather that before I put the battery in. I don't want to weather it all together, if that makes sense, because I'm going to perhaps want to scuff that up or what have you. I think it sits under the seat, but even so, then there is some scratch building to do, and we want to consider whether we want to scratch build first, or whether we want to paint and then add the cables separately, and what material are we going to scratch build it out of. So there's so much to consider. So it's really important to get to grip with the instructions, because I like to paint in batches. So if I'm painting one colour, I want to paint everything I can in that colour. So you know, this is going to be the same colour as that and that, so I want to paint it at the same time. Same with the door, even if I'm adding the door card separately, but what's that colour there? Is that the same as the door? So I'm probably gluing that together first. Does that mean I'm adding and masking? Probably. So we'll add the glass and mask, but we won't put the windscreen wipers on. They're a different colour anyway, so that's helpful. We're not going to put little details like the flappers in, the indicator flappers, just yet either. You know, we've got wheels going on before we've done things like building up the back end that we're going to want to paint. So we've also got to think about, how are we going to show this? Are we going to show this with the door swung open, or with everything shut up? That's going to make a difference to how we paint it. But you know, step 20, and we're building the engine, so we can treat that as a separate sub-assembly along with this front wheel here. But again, quite complicated. Many parts you're going to want to paint before you do anything with it. So even though this is a small and not expensive kit, there's a lot of detail work to do. So you can see we've got cabling there, which is all scratch built. So you're applying it yourself, and it's showing you where it goes and how it plugs in, and when it's passed through there, where it terminates. You know, a lot of detail stuff to do. I mean, they've got it sort of you plumbed in and then attach it. I wouldn't do it like that. I'd attach it and then plumb it in. So 3 first, as it's the furthest away, and you know that 3 is going to finish at the back on there. So it's clearly done. This I'm not sure whether this is metal or whether it's fiberglass, given its shape, or what, but we want to be painting that at the same time as we're painting the body, so we need to do some of the prep on that. And again, how we're going to have the latches, are we having it open? Think personally it seems a shame to not have this open and show off all that engine detail, but again, if you're going to have it closed, you probably don't need to do all the cabling. So yeah, I mean, it gets hinged up and in front, locks in front of the windscreen. So are we going to do that, or are we going to have it ripped off and on the side of the road? All things to consider. Yeah, so quite a complicated little build. Regardless of its size, you could be tricked into thinking this is a simple build, when I think it's probably busier than you think. So I think what we're going to be doing is a lot of building of sub-assemblies and cleaning up parts ready for paint, and then what we'll do is we'll separate them into different containers for different colours. Well, let's get on with it. I'm not going to be showing you in this build every detail. I'm just going to talk you through particular things that I find, things that I think you might find interesting, any tips I have on the build or techniques that I particularly use. Otherwise, we'll just progress through the build, and I'll talk you through how things have gone and what have you. I might show you some assembly, but I won't show it you all. So yeah, that's how we're going to tackle it. So without further ado, let's get on with the first parts, and I think you'd be interested to see me starting to pull this apart and clean up some of these details and making some decisions as we go. So when you come to look at the actual parts rather than looking at them as drawings in the instructions, that can also change your view on how you want to tackle things sometimes. And then when we come to test fit the parts, that's going to again, maybe make decisions in our mind as to what we need to do. So case in point is the very first part we're taking off. We've got 3 ejector pins there, which are going to need to be filled. I think they get covered by the seat, so we'll want to dry fit the seat and have a look at how visible they are as to whether they need doing, but I suspect that front one at least will need to be tackled. But yeah, so anyway, that's our first part off. What we're going to do is take the first few parts off and see how they all interlink with each other. Now, most of them appear to be on this first sprue, which is nice and easy. So we've got this here, which is number 6. We want part 6. Where's that? This one here. So that lays across there like so. Then we've got the front panel. Now be careful because there's some sticky out hinges for the doors and you don't want to cut them off thinking they're sprue gates. So that ultimately will go on there in some way, shape or form. Yeah, can't work that out just yet. Then we've got the battery here. So we can take that off. We've got the pedals. They're quite fine and they're painted in a different colour to the rest of them. They're painted in the grey of the interior of the cabin. So they could be painted in situ, although this is black. And we're going to want to do some chipping and scuffing on that. So that'll have to be painted separately. The battery's also painted black, so I'm already starting to form an opinion of how we're going to tackle this. Right, so we've then got some pipework and switches that will go in the back of that, and they're also painted in the grey by the looks of it, so they could be assembled, so we might as well get them off. So that's 29, which is tiny part here, which is the motor for the windscreen wiper. Let's not lose that. And then we've got 27, which looks like, oh, I'm not sure if that's right. B27, not BA27. Right, okay. Okay. So, as I'm cleaning up parts, I'm also test fitting them. And what I've found with this part, which is the little, I'm guessing it's the drive shaft, unless it was just front wheel drive, I don't know. But this bar that goes across the floor pan here, it has 2 little location tabs, both of which are oversized. So what you need to do is just go in with your knife and trim them down a little bit. Make sure you trim both sides. If you trim just one side, then you're moving the peg off center. So you need to make sure that you've still got a center line there. So just trim down a little bit on both sides and it should go in. So it's always good to test fit these things as you work through them, just to make sure that everything fits nicely. And then I'm carrying on cleaning up these parts and test fitting them. Just looking at these doors now, and what we can do is we can put the door card in and glue these 2 halves together. to make a little sub-assembly ready for painting. The glazing has 3 location pins, so we can put that in later, and obviously we can put the handles on later as well, which means we can do some weathering before we attach components. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to glue these up, and then I think we can treat those as sub-assemblies. So we have a subframe here that we can build up. All of this is being painted in black, so we can build this up, spray this all as one, including adding the hubs there. So that's what we're going to do. So this is the first stage. Cleaned the parts up already. There's a bit of seam clean up on here, which is a little bit tricky, but otherwise it was fairly straightforward. And we're just going to hold that into place. The one feature of Miniart kits is they are fiddly. So we're going to glue the first half in and just hold that in place, make sure it's aligned. There you go, check it's flat and square, and then we can glue the other half in. And that's something that is not uncommon when you're building Miniart kits, is that you're doing lots of delicate work and checking and holding, because the plastic tends to be quite thin. So a lot of manufacturers would have made this as one complete part and then you put that in, but you lose some of the detail in doing that. So it's a call that Miniart regularly make to focus on the detail, and I can't disagree with them in fairness. Right, now we have a pin in the middle that locks into that plate that we've just added on. So we'll just dry fit that first, and that holds into place lovely. So we can glue that in. There we go, that's really good. Just going to push those ends down, make sure they're in nice and square. There we go, that's the first part of our assembly in place, which will be the rear suspension. So now we can put the other plate on the other side and the end hubs. So I'll crack on with cleaning up those parts. Having looked at these parts, I've decided that it's too delicate an assembly to put the hubs on at this stage. So we'll build this up without the hubs, because the hubs attach onto this tiny little peg on the end. It is not going to be a strong fit, so we will put them on right at the end of our process, I think. But this assembly goes together really nicely. So there we go. Now we have this shaft, this drive shaft that needs to go into there. So I need to clean that up. Has some pretty hefty sprue gates on it. It's going to leave us some nibs that we've got to just clean up, and some seam. And I often do the seam first, but it doesn't really matter which way around you do it. But sometimes if you do the seam first, you can understand if you need to sand the full length or not. So you can save yourself a bit of time, because if you sand the local area and then come to do the seams, and then you might realise you've got to do sanding the full length, and then you've got to go back to it. So it's worthwhile to do the seams first, I often think, particularly on cylindrical things. So even though this is cylindrical, we're going to go with a flat just to take the nubs down. And then when we've got them as good as down, we'll leave them. This is going to be a difficult one because we've got this sort of structure here that's in the way. So we'll have to come back to that one in a sec. Use a different solution. Okay, so we can use we were using a 600 grit. I'm going to go in with an 800 sponge now, just to finish that off. That's already feeling smooth. And I'll just take that the full length. There we go. And then we'll do this end piece. Okay. And we can follow that through on the other side. I think that's good. Right, and on this bit here, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go in and pare it back with my knife. So I've got as little work as possible to do, and then we're going to go in with a narrow sanding stick. Finish taking that back. This is a little bit spongy, although it's a bit coarser than I'd like. And then we can go in with a nice smooth one. So this is 800. There we go. So that's that part cleaned up. It's just using the right tools for the elements of the job. Now we've got little location points and we have seam on the ends, so I just want to take that seam off and make sure we've got nothing that's going to cause us any problems with the fit. Okay, so now we can test fit that into the assembly, and we have this part going in. So you've got to check the orientation because the location pin is D-shaped, so you need to make sure you understand where the flat of your D should be, which is at the top. There we go, that's in. So I'm just going to hold that into place. I'm just clamping it with my fingers, and then we can go in and get some glue into that point and glue on this edge here, and that should hold that nicely. So we'll just hold that there for a sec. There we go. So that's our rear assembly. So I think the flat will go on the top side, so that's how you'd look at it. Yeah, looks really cool. Some nice detail in there as well. So right, so as I turn the page, we've got lots of parts building up the engine, so I'm going to skip past all of that for now because I want to concentrate on building framework and the body. We have got the wheels here, and we might be using some of the same colours that we'd be painting, so I've got an option on hubs, and I'd very much like to have a mismatch of hubs just to add to the sort of dereliction look of the vehicle. So I'm going to build the wheels up and the tyres up next in case we need to paint them at the same time. We do have some of the elements that hold the front wheel, but I believe they're all under the cover, so we can leave those as part of the engine. Yeah, I don't think any of this will get seen until later on. You can see how it's all attached there, and then you're going to have the hood over it. So we can leave all of that. So we'll build that front wheel up. The question is whether I'm having a hub on the front wheel or not. I think I probably am, and have one missing off the back. Yeah, so we're getting towards the end of the sub-assembly, the first set of sub-assemblies, I think. So let's get this wheel put together and see what we think. So you have options of hub on or hub off, and I think hub on the front wheel would be nice, because we may well have that at a bit of an angle. So we could have the wheel at an angle with the hub on, and then on the same side a hub missing, and then on the opposite side where you don't see the hub at all from the front wheel, we'll have a hub on. So I think that's the way I'm envisaging this. So our parts are 39, has nice sidewall writing as well. So we've got 39 and we want 38. Nice simple construction, not the multi-layered construction that you sometimes get in Miniart kits. Okay, so that's nice and straightforward. So I'll clean this up and we can see what the fit is like, although I'm expecting it to be exceptional. Okay, the floor of the rear part of the vehicle is, well, it's actually a little bit warped. I think when we come to fit this, I think we might have a little bit of a problem with it, but there's a little location tab on the inside of this end piece, so we're just going to put that together. As always with Miniart kits, sometimes your problem is making sure that things are square because of the way they build their parts up. So we're just going to take care, and again we're doing one half first, making sure that we're happy it's bob on. So that should be more than enough glue. I don't think I need to jig this. I think I can do it by eye. So that looks good to me. And what we can do is just place it inside here and see that it fits. And that it's nice and square, which it appears to be. I just want to check that everything is nicely lined up. There we go. Which is making me wonder if we can actually build this up yet, but I've got some fairly detailed paintwork that I want to do in here, so no, maybe not, but we can check that it's fitting all its components, which it appears to, so happy with that. Right, let that dry and we can move on to cleaning up the roof. And then that's the main body of the vehicle done in its component parts. What's not clear to me is what colour we're going to do inside. So I think we'd go with a grey. Yeah, there's no reference to the inside colour. But the inside of the door cards is grey, so I think the inside of the vehicle is probably grey as well. So that's what we'll go with, which gives us some nice options for weathering. Pretty much the last sub-assembly we can build up is the bonnet. So this is going to be a different colour on mine, but looking at the assembly, we need to install the grill, whichever one we're going to use, in that opening before we put that plastic part in. And I am going to want to spray the whole thing that colour, and then we'll paint that separately in addition. So I think I'm going to go for the one with the logo, which would suggest a pre-war or early war version. And that's as much cleanup as we can do. So I'm going to clean this up, build this up, I'll show you that, and then we're going to have a look at the figures. This part is probably the most difficult to clean up because it's slide moulded. So once you've removed the sprue gates and you've got a couple of ejector pins that you have to remove from there, you've then got to deal with all the seams that come from the slide moulding process. And I'm just going to highlight them with this permanent marker. That's going to allow me to make sure I've removed them. But I'm just going to show you how many seams you've got to remove. So all of that black marker we need to remove now, because it's over seams that are formed from the slide moulding process. So the tools come at it in different directions, and that's left this witness, which under paint will stand out very, very clearly. So you can see in the light there, you actually have a bit of a step, and because of the detail like the rivets and stuff that you've got around there, you have to be very careful with the sanding. So we're going to go in with quite a gentle sanding process, and take it back as best as we can and then polish it up. So we're going to use, I'm going to go in with a narrow sanding starting at 400, and then we're going to end up with polishing that up. So yeah, I do have a 220 sponge as well, which will help with some of the shapes and things. So it's just working away at it slowly till we get it where we need it to be. So inserting the grill, and the trick is to get the photo etch to fit where you want it and hold itself in place without any glue, and the glue is just there to make sure it doesn't move again. And that's how I approach most etch, to be honest. It should naturally want to stay where you want it to be. So if you're folding it, that fold stays, it's not springing open, because you're generally using CA glue for photo etch, and that's quite a brittle glue, and any force from the photo etch that stays in there after you've placed it will eventually break the glue if you're not careful. So that is pretty much holding its shape. It has been shaped a little just by pressing it gently with the fingers. So that is where I want that to be now. So we can get that glued into place. So we'll use some thin CA and just run it in and allow that to naturally form a bond, and then we should be okay. So let's have a go at that. So we'll just let that sit there for a moment. You can blow on it to speed it up. The moisture in your breath will help the glue bond. So now we can just push that into place on the bottom, and a little tap of glue there, and that should do the job now. So we'll just let that dry off for a sec and get our glue put away. Well, I have ended up putting the wheel hubs on because this assembly needs to attach to those to fix in place, so they're all sort of connected. What I'm not convinced about is how easy they are. I mean, it's very fiddly. This is not a beginner's model, even though it's a small model. But I'd argue that no Miniart models are really a beginner's model. It's just making sure the hubs are straight because the fit is quite slack. So I suppose it doesn't matter too much as we're going to do a crashed vehicle, but I would like to try and get it about right. That looks about right, I think. Right, I'm going to show you how I go about making these little brackets that we need for carrying some of the cables. There's about half a dozen or so on the whole model, 2 of which go on this rear suspension frame. So it starts off as a piece of photo etch, and what we're doing is finding the halfway point and then just bending that over in half. Just making sure I've actually bent that the wrong way, so we'll just flatten it again. Need to make sure that the bolt head is facing outwards. There we go. So we bent it at the halfway point. And then I'm getting a piece of wire. This isn't the wire that we're going to be using. It's slightly oversized, which means the wire that I end up using will pass through it. So we can install this without any fear that the wire won't pass through it. Try not to drop it. It is very fiddly, as you can see. Okay, and then we're just using the tweezers to clamp it together around the cable. There we go. And then we squeeze the end together, making it form an eye around that bit of wire, making sure it's all nice and straight, which it is. Then we can slide it off, and that's our little tiny little bracket made there. So we want to glue that on before we lose it. So let's just check the location. So the location is on the inside of that there. So just put a little dab of thin CA on the inside there. That's going to stay wet until we put something on it to make contact. And then using my tweezers, this is the part where it can all go wrong. Flick out of the tweezers and you never see the part again. Make sure we get it the right way around. And just drop it on place. Adjust the position, and then what I'm going to do, thin CA, you don't see a witness of it, so you can afford to go back and flood the area with the glue. There we go, that is our brackets in place, and that will allow us to use our wire, pass our wire through. I'll be using lead wire for that job. Right, with all my sub-assemblies done on the actual vehicle and it still being too warm in the UK for painting, I'm moving my attention to building the figures. Now the way I go around that is I clean up each individual limb or body part before we then do some fit tests and then make sure everything fits, and I try and sand things so that I'm not having to fill, and we will build the figure up completely. We probably will need to clean up his rifle so that we can poise the hands, but we will build the figure up. I don't paint the arms separately or anything like that. I've found when I've done that in the past it causes more problems with touch-ups and stuff, so it's just not worth it. I think of all the figures, the guy with the bagpipes is probably going to be the more difficult, because that tucks under his arm, so we might not actually be able to fit that in separately, so we'll worry about that when we come to that figure. No doubt I'll do that figure last. All the others seem fairly straightforward, so we just have to identify which figure we've got here, and we've got figure E, which was that one I was originally on. Okay. Right, we're doing this guy first then. Well, that's our bagpipe player made up. I'm quite happy with how he's looking. Got a little bit of filling to do, just a tiny amount, but yeah, he's come together really well. So happy with that. And they do look really nice when they're made up, these figures. So I've got 3 of them made up now. This is the guy carrying the larger Bren gun, and then we've got this guy who's walking holding his rifle. So they do look very natural. I'm very happy with these figures so far. 2 more to do. I will show you those when they're done, and then we can crack on. Well, that's my figures made up and roughly put in position on the diorama base. So we'll have the tempo here. We'll have to organise and see how it goes, but the plan is to have the tempo sort of part off the road. We will see. But I think they look good like that. Quite happy with them like that. So yeah, so next thing we need to do is prepare them for priming, which means inserting a rod in the foot of each one of them. Well, the first job is to straighten the wire so that we can insert it and then cut it into lengths. There we go. That'll be straight enough for what we need. And then drill a hole in the heel so we can go up the leg like so, and then we put a bit of wire in and cut it to length. Now, it depends on what you're going to mount your figure on for painting, how long you do that. I would recommend cork. Cork wine bottle tops are really good for this job, because you can shove the wire in, and the cork's fairly stable and it's easy to hold. I can see I'm marking off with my fingernail how far up we've gone. I can get an understanding of how deep we are. Well, that'll be plenty. So we can just insert that wire into the hole. Obviously I'd already worked out which drill bit size I needed, and then we can cut our wire like so, and then we'll just put a dab of medium CA in, and there we go. Now these have not cut so long, you might want to cut them longer. That's because I have this little device here for painting figures, and I don't need it all that long for it to work. So now before people start, I mean, it's a great little device. You can see you can rotate it and you can hold it between your fingers like that, and that keeps it steady while you're painting on it. So it's really clever. But don't go asking me where to get one, because I've had this years and I cannot remember for the life of me where I got it. I wish I had another one, to be honest. I don't know why, because you can only use one at a time, but yeah, they're really cool. Yeah. Now, when they're not in here, I will probably mount it in one of these, and then that'll just hold him up, or the little Tamiya clips in the rotary thing, so when the paint's dry, then I've moved on to the next one and hold it like that. So that's sort of my general way of working with figures. So I'm going to carry on and get the others all sorted out, get these bits of wire glued in, and then we're ready for priming them then. Okay, we need to talk about how we're going to tackle the build. So I have just primed everything, the figures and my unassembled sub-assemblies for my tempo, and we've done all of that so that we can start working through the build of this diorama. Now, the plan is that we will cut backwards and forwards between the figures and the tempo build. But what we've got to do, because I've not done figures on the channel before, is we've just got to talk about the composition of the diorama and how that influences what we do with the figures. Because one of the biggest mistakes I see modelers doing is painting the figures all in the same way, and then using painting techniques, which means the figures have all been painted in the same way. And that's a mistake, because when you're creating a diorama, your figure might look awesome. It might be painted way beyond my ability, but if it's wrong, sorry, it's still wrong. And what a lot of modelers don't tend to take into account is the composition of the diorama. Not just what you can see in the diorama, but what you can't see in the diorama. So I wanted to explain this to you, and we're going to use one of my figures here to give you an example. And he's already not quite in shot, is it? He's already giving you an example of what I'm talking about without you even knowing yet. So right, what I've done is I've drawn two diorama bases. So our diorama has a road that goes through the center of it at an angle. So you're going to look at it in that direction, and we intend to have figures marching like that, 5 figures, and then we intend to have the tempo off the road sort of like that. Yeah, I don't know why I've not done that square, but that's sort of the plan. So it probably will be a bit more of an angle, so it's not quite square onto you, and it might be more in that direction, but you get the general idea. So that is my intended composition. So we will have the tempo in the foreground, we'll have the little cat here, and we'll have the figures going that way. Now the eye looks, the western eye looks from the top left to the bottom right. So what will happen is that the eye will see that there's nothing there, and will be drawn to the tempo, and then we'll be drawn to the figures in the background, and we'll end on the figure at the front, which will be our chap on the bagpipes here. So he will be there, and he will be the last figure you see, because he's also the most interesting, the most different figure out of the bunch. So that's my composition. I'm just going to give you an example of a different composition to help explain what you need to consider when you're painting figures that I think a lot of people don't consider. Right, so let's say we had the tempo there, and I had one figure there looking at the tempo, couple walking past, and then a couple talking to each other there. So these are all figures, and to help you with understanding what I'm about to say, I'm going to put a little arrow on them, and the arrow dictates the direction of the face. Okay, now on my diorama, all of the figures are facing the same way, so it's actually going to be quite easy for me to do what I'm about to explain. So the one thing that you're not going to see on the diorama but affects all of this is the sun. So let's assume that the sun is on this side, and therefore it's shining that way across the diorama on the side. So this is the trap that a lot of people fall into. They paint their figure, they do a really nice job, they paint all the shadow and everything into all the folds, and they do it the same at the front as they do at the back, as they do at the sides. And so they're almost doing above lighting. And I've even seen a technique that's become shared a little bit over the last 12 months or so, where people try and shortcut painting figures by spraying in one direction and automatically putting shadow on it. And it instantly makes the figure wrong, because in nature, you've not got the same amount of sunlight on all four sides of any object. And you can see the shadow there, just proving my point, yeah? The light comes in one direction, and therefore the shadow is in one direction, and you need to paint your figure with that in mind. So in this instance, I'm going to be doing light sort of on this half of the figure, with the sun coming in sideways on. So the figure will be slightly darker on this side and slightly lighter on this side, not in terms of colour saturation on things like the kit and the uniform, but in terms of the shading we do to emulate shadow on the figure. And that's what I think most modelers, when they're painting their figures, miss. I think even some serious figure painters tend to miss it. But when you're doing a diorama, it's really important. Now in my case, all of the figures are facing the same way. And if you look at that figure now, you can already see there's light at the back, dark at the front. That's the position of my overhead lamp. Yeah? So you want to capture that when you're painting it. But if I was doing this diorama, you know, this guy would need to have that there lighter and that there darker. This guy would roughly be the same because he's in the same direction. But this guy would be dark on the front. This guy would be dark on his back. And this guy would be a little bit more than half. He'd be a little bit, sorry, I've done the wrong side, but you get the idea. So you've got to paint each figure with their position in mind. You can't just paint them and then decide where you're going to put them. You've got to do an understanding of your diorama, the composition of it, before you start putting it together. I always do this. This is only the second diorama I've done on the channel, but it's really important. Now you could do the diorama and then go, right, where do I want to put the figures? But you can't paint the figures until you've decided where they go. So I just wanted to share that because I think that's one of the most important tips for figure painters, new or old, is to think of your composition and what have you. Now, you can apply that to vehicles, but it's less important to vehicles because what you're doing when you're painting figures is you're largely painting in shadow and light and how it's reacting with the shape of the figure. Whereas with a vehicle, you're really dealing with you are dealing with shadow to a certain degree, but you're also dealing with things like muck and grime and build-up of dust. And that behaves differently than just light on its own. Now, you can take into effect light, and if you were doing something like a diorama set in the desert, you might consider that a little bit more. You might want to sun bleach stationary objects more than others and that sort of stuff. But in this instance, we're not going to worry too much about the weathering of the vehicle being taken account of the sunlight, but we are with the figures because it will make them look that much more lifelike within the limits of my abilities of painting figures, just as a caveat. So there you go. I thought that was important to share. I have now painted in grey everything, so we're going to bob back between figures and the tempo painting. As paint dries on one, we'll work on the other, and vice versa. So we've not painted figures on the channel before, so I have a particular way of doing it which is fairly new to me, and I'm just going to take you through to that. Now, when I say it's fairly new, when I first started out painting figures, and I don't remember where this came from, but I remember reading, it must have been in a magazine because that was my only real external influence on my modelling, was that you painted figures in the same way as you get dressed. So you'd start with the flesh and do all the flesh tones, then you'd do shirts and hats and trousers and boots, and then you'd do kit last, and you'd work out away from the figure. And I did it that way for years and got okay results, and I never considered myself a great figure painter. I then started doing a little bit of research into painting figures because I wanted to get better, and I bought my daughter a book on painting figures because that's what she was getting into: painting busts, painting dragons, painting sort of large scale resin figures. And she started doing what I told her to do, which was to paint as you get dressed. Anyway, after about 6 months, she came to me and went, "Dad, you're wrong. It's actually easier to paint the other way around and paint the skin last and paint the outside things first, because when you're doing the paint, you're putting it on so thin, it's like a wash and it's just settling in, and you don't want it on the top surfaces. So you paint the top surfaces first, and I find that easier." So that is what we're going to do. We are going to paint from the top surfaces back, painting details, and then painting the uniform, and we'll do the skin last. And if you think about it, when you paint something that's got raised detail, you paint the raised detail first and then paint around it so it's nice and sharp. So it's the same principle with our figures. So we're going to start with figure painting. Now I'm going to go away and get all my paints together, and then we can talk about that. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. It's free, and that way you won't miss my first impressions, my tool reviews, my product reviews, and any of my builds, including wooden model kits as well as plastic. It's all free, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can hit my PayPal link in the text below. Every pound goes straight into the channel, to keep the cameras rolling and to do more fun stuff for you to watch.